All right, so with the spirit of underdogs in mind, I want to give you some players who are not normally set-it-and-forget-it players, but are players who I think could have big week ones. Guys who are usually on your bench most week, but who you should be considering putting into your lineup this week. First up, I love some Jared Goff on Monday night, a second-tier quarterback on most rosters. He's actually my QB7 in week one. Remember, Goff was tied for the NFL lead in passing touchdowns over the second half of last year, and he's got new weapons like Brandon Cooks to give him some significant upside. A lot of people don't realize Jared Goff led the NFL in touchdown passes on the road last year. And this game is in Oakland, where he gets to face a Raiders defense that, oh, you know what, just lost Khalil Mack. Yeah, I think he's going to have a clean pocket. Give me some Jared Goff in week one. Another quarterback I think is worthy of a start this week, Tyrod Taylor. Obviously getting the start over Baker Mayfield. I think he's worthy of a start for your fantasy team over the likes of Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, Kirk Cousins, and Patrick Mahomes, among others. That's right, I have him ranked above all those guys. Remember, we're talking about a Steelers defense that in this matchup last year gave up 2 different top 10 performances to DeShone Kizer. DeShone Kizer, who, by the way, is not as good as Tyrod Taylor and didn't have nearly the weapons that Taylor's going to have when he faces off against Pittsburgh on Sunday. I have Taylor as my QB11 this week. A running back worth a look? How about Jamaal Williams? No Aaron Jones. Ty Montgomery I expect to be primarily used in the passing game, so Williams is set to start the season as Green Bay's lead back. We're talking about a guy who averaged 20 touches per game in the Packers' final 8 games last year, thrown 6 touchdowns, and guess what? From week 9 on last year, Jamaal Williams was the 6th best running back in fantasy. They obviously went run heavy because of the injury to Aaron Rodgers, but the fact of the matter is he's going to get a ton of work. Even though it's a tough Bears defense, this offense will score a lot of points, and when they do it on the ground, it's going to be Jamaal Williams. He's definitely worth a look as a flex, even in PPR. 2 pass catchers I think could have big week ones after disappointing seasons last year, Corey Davis, Tyler Eifert. Davis actually got a 23.1% target share from Marcus Mariota in the postseason. I think that carries over to this year, right? By the way, he's also going to do that against a Dolphins team that surrendered the 5th most receiving yards to wideouts last season. Finally healthy, he's my wide receiver 22 in week one. And speaking of finally healthy, over the last 3 years, Tyler Eifert has caught 15 passes in the end zone. That's tied for most in the NFL, despite playing just 23 of a potential 48 games. He's healthy now. He has a great matchup with a Colts defense that struggles against tight ends. I have him as my number 11 tight end this week ahead of guys like Jimmy Graham and David Njoku. So the fact of the matter is...
Hey, Barry, what's up? It's me again. Listen, I finished off my time with that tomato.
Yeah.
But I missed that very last part. What was the name of the gentleman you just mentioned, the last name again?
Eifert, Tyler Eifert.
You sure do, pal. Toot, toot.
Please go hit yourself with another tomato.
Yeah, right.
If you draft your team like most fantasy team players do, you fill out your starting lineup in the early rounds, and then later you get some bench guys. And when you leave the draft, your week one roster pretty much set, right? You've put about as much thought into your week one roster as my puppet boss, Norby, does into what should be on this show.
LeBron.
Right. LeBron. I get it. But I'm here to tell you that you're doing it wrong. Listen, just because you drafted a guy to be your QB1 or RB2, for example, doesn't mean he should necessarily be in your lineup for week number 1. Take Jimmy Garoppolo, for example. Look, he was on my preseason love list. I think he's going to have a huge year. But week 1, on the road, against the Vikings, honestly, he's not a start for me. He's my QB20, behind players you can find on most every waiver wire, like Tyrod Taylor, Jared Goff, or Andy Dalton. Vikings allowed the fewest passing touchdowns in the league last year, so honestly, if you can find a better option than Garoppolo, I'd suggest it. I'd also think about another option besides Russell Wilson this week. You know, Wilson is traditionally a slow starter. Get this, over the past 3 seasons, his best week 1 was QB15. I mean, he's a guy that really struggles early on. He's my QB13 this week on the road against a Denver Broncos team that last year allowed the 4th fewest passing yards in the NFL. Remember, Doug Baldwin not 100%. Speaking of defense, hey, I love the Bears and the Texans for the full season. But if you have the roster space, look at some defenses with better week 1 matchups. Bears on the road at Lambeau, where you know Aaron Rodgers is anxious to get back on the field. And the Texans are at New England. You don't love your teams going to face Aaron Rodgers or heading to Gillette to face the GOAT. Look, but please, do not straight up drop the Texans. Look at Houston's schedule after this week. I mean, those are some brutal offenses they get to face after Tom Brady and company. Titans, Giants, Colts without offensive line, they don't scare you. The Bills, the Dolphins in there. Like, that's a great schedule for the Texans after this week. But home opener on the road at New England, no thank you for me. The Texans defense will be a play for me after week 1. They'll be atop my defensive rankings going forward. So, okay, let's get back to some players with a starter quality back that I think will struggle in week number 1, Alfred Morris. He's my RB20 for this season. I've been telling you, Morris should be rostered in every single league because he will become the lead back in a very good 49ers offense. But he won't be the lead back in week 1. Sounds like that's going to be Matt Breida's job. And regardless of who gets the bulk of the carries, again, Breida a little bit more familiar with the 49ers playbook at this point, the fact of the matter is that stout Vikings defense won't be good for anyone. It is really tough to run on Minnesota, and now he's in a timeshare with Breida. I want to see it play out first before I put Alfred Morris into my starting lineup. But again, I still think he's the back to have in San Francisco. Here's some other starter quality players I think are worth considering benching in week 1. Don't love Kirk Cousins this week. I expect a very run-heavy game plan from Minnesota, which last year had the second highest rushing percentage in the NFL. Look, Sammy Watkins struggled in the preseason. And the Chargers allowed the fewest deep completions last season. Sammy Watkins is not somebody that's going to be starting for me. Jimmy Graham, we talked about this in the preseason, to be very touchdown dependent this year. Last season, the Bears allowed just 4 touchdowns to tight end all season long. Jimmy Graham is outside my top 10. And I'd also sit Antonio Gates until he shakes the rust off. I like him for the season, but Kansas City traditionally has been very tough against the tight end.
For more, sign up now for ESPN Plus.